It has been exactly 2 weeks since the coup was announced in Niger. The West-backed President Muhammad Bazoum has been thrown out and military leaders are currently controlling the country. The situation could mark a new phase in Africa, and the thought of this has divided the ECOWAS group. It is a bloc of 15 members of West African states. They tried giving an ultimatum, even threatened with military action. But the coup leaders have stayed put. So ECOWAS will now hold a summit on Thursday, pushing for a diplomatic solution. Since the coup, Niger has been slapped with some of the most stringent sanctions, and it affects much more to a country like Niger. Now, according to the 2023 budget projections, the country had expected to have a budget of $5.53 billion for this fiscal year, and 40% of this budget was expected to come from external partners, which looks extremely dicey now. But Niger has an ace up its sleeve. This yellow cake, known as uranium, it is an ore vital for nuclear industry. And Niger is the world's 7th biggest producer of this chemical element. If ECOWAS wants to fire the big guns, then uranium is what it will target. And if it does, it's not just Niger's future that will be plunged into uncertainty. It will also hit Western countries. Niger is the second largest exporter of uranium to France. It is also a major exporter to Canada. The decision will make Europe look at the world's biggest exporter of the ore. And as fate would have it, it is no other than Russia, a country that has waged a war in Europe and is already in the West's bad books. Speaking of Russia, it is a country you will hear more and more when it comes to Niger. Russia is watching the developments very closely. The Kremlin is trying to up its influence in the region. Look at this. These visuals are coming straight from Niger's capital, Niamey. White, blue and red fabrics are selling like hotcake. And before you get confused, it's not the French flag, but the Russian flag. The flags have been in demand since the coup was announced. This is testament that there is intention from Russia and there is acceptance from Niger. The coup has exposed Moscow's grand strategy in Africa. The two sides have been regularly sitting on summit tables. Wagner is expanding its footprint in the region, and Vladimir Putin is ready to point back to the West. So it seems Russia fits the perfect jigsaw puzzle in Niger's crises. David Otto is the director for Geneva Center for Africa, Security and Strategic Studies. Is now joining us live from Abuja, Nigeria. David, good to see you and welcome to the show. And before we delve into matters trade, Niger, despite having a coup leader, they've also appointed a new prime minister, and Bazoum's party says that the dire conditions of the ousted president while in detention are growing. What really is the message that the orchestrators are telling organizations like ECOWAS and the West, with them remaining defiant and even appointing people?
Well, they've also appointed governors. They've done that by appointing, key security agencies, generals of the military and some from the police, and all other security agencies have been given positions. The message from the junta is very clear. They are moving on. They've been able to seize power from President Bazoum. They are blaming it on the decadence of the economy, the country, the corruption, the insecurity, but more so they are blaming it on, the French, colonization or neocolonialism, which they say, has, not given the country an ability to breathe. So the military junta on its path, seems to be forging ahead, while, the president is in a condition that no one can ascertain. And this is one of the reasons, why regional bodies like ECOWAS and the international community is calling for at least the release of the president and his family. But for the military junta, they are moving ahead in defiance of any ECOWAS threats, that we've seen in place.
David, let's now talk about trade. Uranium is the most precious commodity in the Sahel. Burkina Faso had announced that it will cut exports to the United States and even France. Niger is threatening to follow suit. What impact will that have on all of them, the US, France, and even the Sahel region?
Well, from a regional point, I think that any kind of instability will impact on the region, which it's already very volatile. From an economic point, this is going to affect France. France has become the French, brand has become very toxic. The United States, has spent billions in Niger. It has one of the biggest drone bases in that country. Germany, the same. And we know that Niger, it's very critical, especially when it comes to offsetting what the European states and NATO has termed Russia's weaponization of gas. The European Union has been very keen to see that there is a gas pipeline from Nigeria through Niger to Algeria, and then, of course, to the European market. So, the region is quite rich. And for the French, at this very critical point in time, to be losing face, from Mali, Burkina Faso, and now in Niger, I'm not talking about Guinea because that has already happened. Right. It's a very critical time, in the economic stability and reliance, from the European states, especially France, in what they saw as their last bastion in Niger Republic.
David, finally, the Junta has rejected negotiations and the ECOWAS has issued more sanctions. What do you think is causing friction between these Sahel countries, which include Burkina Faso and Mali, who have sort of gained or ganged up together, and the regional bloc?
A lot of these countries have, pointed out to double standards in terms of how ECOWAS has been able to deal with the coup or the coups, what I call the coup pandemic in the region. First of all, ECOWAS has not been able to provide any defense mechanism, to stop coups from happening. They have, been accused of ignoring situations where presidents fraud themselves into elections, where constitutions are being changed for presidents to run for more terms, where the cry of the citizens, in terms of the economy is responded by deploying the forces of law and order into the streets. So this is a very key point. But more so, a lot of these countries are pointing to the fact that, there is still the French brand, the French colonialism, assimilation, plundering their region. And, they are doing this through regional bodies like ECOWAS. So the accusations are there. But the problem now for ECOWAS, which has put itself in a very tight corner, is, what happens, when and if the Nigerian junta refuses to adhere to any of these sanctions. What if they continue to rely on neighbors like Burkina Faso and Mali? And what if they fight back in the event that ECOWAS, carries out an intervention? That is the big problem that ECOWAS is facing at this point in time, because honestly, there seems to be no appetite in the region for any military intervention. It is a tight corner for ECOWAS, but the military junta in Niger is moving on, as we've seen.
All right, I've been talking to the Director for Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies, David Otto. Thank you very much for all your inputs and for talking to WION World is One today.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.